The note that broke. Eli Santos measured his days in eighth notes. He could tell the hour by the angle of sunlight on his piano's fallboard, the season by the sound of pedestrians slipping past his apartment window. The competition was in 2 weeks, a real one, the kind with agents in the front row and a recording contract announced with confetti. He practiced to the old metronome until its wooden body hummed like a small animal. "Dude," said Mark, leaning in the kitchen doorway, "you're gonna melt the keys." Eli grinned. They'd been roommates for 3 years, friends since high school. Eli paid most of the rent. Mark was between things, a phrase like a smudge you couldn't wipe clean. Eli never minded. Friendship is a kind of rhythm section. You keep time for each other when the song gets weird. On the morning of the competition, Eli wore the only suit that still fit and breathed steam from a cheap coffee. He opened the piano to warm up and frowned. The action felt wrong, heavy, gummy. He played an arpeggio, and the sound came out thick as syrup. "What did you do to it?" Eli asked the room, "the way you talk to a chair after you stub your toe." Mark wandered out, "Hair mess." "Do what to what?" "The action," Eli said, working a scale. The repetition mechanism was sluggish. He lifted the fallboard and peered inside. His stomach turned. Someone had dabbed something along parts of the key bed and hammers, clear and tacky. He touched his finger to it and smelled it. Sugared water? No, something like craft glue. "I gotta go," Eli said, panic sparking. He grabbed his bag, sprinted to the venue, and begged the staff for time with the practice room. The Steinway in the back hall was a Rolls Royce compared to his piano. He adjusted, hands trembling, and when his slot came, he walked onto the stage in Saturday. He played like a man pulling a rope hand over hand in a storm. Notes he'd owned all year skittered. A run he could do in sleep fell apart like a stack of plates. He bowed, sick to his core, and watched the prize slip to a boy with a haircut like a clean thought. Back home, the apartment was too bright. Mark had bought chips and celebratory beer. "How'd it go?" he asked, and when Eli didn't answer, he added, "Next time, man, you'll crush it." Eli sat at the kitchen table and looked at the white laminate until the pattern became a constellation. He told himself it could have been an accident. Maybe Mark had spilled something cleaning. Maybe the universe had burped. He cleaned the piano for hours, careful, slow, like tending a wound. Days became weeks. Eli picked up gigs, taught lessons, practiced until his back became a single ache. Mark slept in, borrowed Eli's car, ate the groceries Eli bought with tip money, and said, "Sorry, I'll get you back," with a smile that never seemed to add up. One afternoon, hunting for a spare cable, Eli opened the hall closet and knocked over a plastic tote. A bottle rolled out and clinked against his shoe. He picked it up. Craft Bond Clear, multi-surface adhesive. He'd never seen it before. It wasn't dusty. It was half full. He stared at it, and in the little wobbling window of the bottle's plastic, he saw a memory. The way his action had felt that morning, the tack, the drag. His chest hollowed, like someone had scooped him with a ladle. "Mark," he called. Mark came out from his room, phone in hand. "What's up?" Eli held up the bottle. Mark's face didn't change the way an innocent face changes. It held still like a coin deciding which side to show. "What is this?" Eli asked. "Glue," Mark said too casually. "For posters." "For my piano," Eli said, the words quiet because anger whispered is scarier than shouted. "You're overreacting," Mark said, which is what guilty people say to shrink the room around your doubt. Then, after a beat he couldn't help himself, he exhaled through his nose and said, "You were going to win anyway." There was not denial but resentment blooming like mold. Eli set the bottle on the table between them. "Why?" "Mark, Saturday, because you always win. You always get the applause. You pay the rent, and everyone loves you for it. Do you know what it's like to be the friend of the prodigy? It's like being the stool he sits on." "I paid your rent," Eli said, astonished at how small his voice sounded. "Yeah," Mark said, bitter smile. "And then you win the big thing, and I'm your project forever." I wanted, he stopped, as if the truth had a door he didn't want to open fully. "I wanted one day where you didn't get everything." The fight was not loud. Loud fights can be cleaned up. This one broke quieter things. How could you? And I thought we were and get out and don't come back. Eli packed Mark's duffel with hands that shook and sat in the hall. When he closed the door, the apartment gasped around him, a sudden bigger space where something ugly had lived. For a while, Eli slept too late, then not at all. He learned the many shapes of the word alone and decided to survive all of them. He took the piano apart and rebuilt it, key by precise key, learning its bones until they felt like his. He stopped buying two of everything. The rent check was lighter, the air too. 2 months later, a new competition rolled in. Regional, then national, then world finals if you got lucky. Eli entered because he had to know whether his music was still his. In the practice room before his round, he put his palms on the wood and whispered, "We're okay." He didn't mean the instrument. He played like a truth. He did not think about winning. He thought about phrases he'd loved since he was 12, and about the teacher who had given him a metronome and said, "Timing is compassion. It's how you care for the listener." When the last note faded, the room paused the way a room pauses when it knows it heard something honest. Then the applause came, loud enough to make the lights shiver. He won the round, then the next, then the finals. There was confetti this time. An agent pressed a card into his hand, voice bright. "We're booking a European series." A journalist asked about influences. Eli said a name that wasn't Mark's and felt free. The tour splashed his face onto posters. The apartment got new curtains. The fridge had actual produce. He learned how to wear nicer clothes without feeling like he was betraying the boy who conjugated coupons. One rainy evening, after a rehearsal that left his forearms singing, someone buzzed the entry. Eli opened the lobby cam and saw a version of Mark that looked like a story told in bad weather. Beard overgrown, coat too thin. He had a newspaper under his arm. Eli knew which page he had folded it open to. His own face looked up from that article in a tux. Eli went downstairs. Mark stood straighter, trying to look like the friend he once was. "Hey," Mark said. "Congrats. You did it." Eli nodded. "What do you need, Mark?" Mark glanced past him at the warm-lit lobby. "Help," he said, and for a heartbeat, Eli saw the boy who'd once slept on his couch freshman year and cried after a breakup into Eli's good towel. Eli let him in. He took him up the elevator. He poured him soup, the kind you keep for winter. Mark ate like a person who had learned how hunger changes your manners. "Look," Mark said at last, spoon down. "I made a mistake." Eli smiled without humor. "Singular?" "I was scared," Mark said. "I didn't want to watch you succeed again and feel like I was fading. I wanted to stop that feeling just once." "I'm sorry." "You're sorry because you're cold," Eli said, not unkind, just accurate. Mark looked at the wall where a new poster hung. Eli at a piano, head bowed. "You could forgive me," he said. It did not sound like a question. Eli stood. "Come on." He led Mark into the studio. The piano gleamed. He'd saved for the finish. He opened the lid. The hammers were clean. The keys shone. Eli played a few bars, casual as breathing, and the room filled with something like mercy. He stopped, turned to Mark, and said, "This is what we could have shared. Rent, groceries, car insurance. Those were small things. This was the big thing. Being in the room when someone you love becomes the thing they are. You could have had a front row seat. Instead, you try to break the instrument I love because it loves me back." Mark's face moved through a weather system of expressions. "So that's it." Eli opened the door. "That's it." Mark stepped into the hall, turned once as if he would argue with a lock, and then left. Eli closed the door and pressed his palm to it for a second, not because he doubted, but because endings have a weight and you should lift them carefully. He returned to the piano and sat. He did not play triumphant music. He played something steady, a piece that began with a single note held as long as the hand could bear. He thought about compassion as timing, about not rushing the morning, about letting it leave at its own pace. When the note ended, he took his hands off the keys and listened to the silence in the room. Clean, simple his. Then he began again, and the music moved forward the way it does when there is no one left to sabotage it. Eli Santos had never grown used to airports. The roar of announcements, the flicker of departure boards, the endless march of black rolling suitcases. Somewhere between Tokyo and Toronto, he stopped trying. Fame, it turned out, was less like a dream and more like a schedule. Cities blurred, applause filled the gaps, and hotel rooms became interchangeable except for the view out the window. Still, every night when he touched the piano, it was real again. He would bow, take a seat, place his fingers on ivory or synthetic keys, and the music poured out like something alive, something stubborn, something his. Reviewers called him luminous. Agents called him marketable. Fans called him a genius. But Eli thought of himself, still, as a boy who once played in a cracked apartment with a friend watching from the couch. And sometimes, in the middle of a concert, he thought he saw Mark. A face in the audience, gaunt or unshaven, eyes fixed on him. By the second bow, the seat was empty. Always empty. When he was alone, Eli admitted he wasn't sure which haunted him more, the betrayal or the ghost of companionship that betrayal had left behind. Between tours, Eli began writing letters. Not to his parents. They had long since moved south, uninterested in his career. Not to his agent, who had plenty of words already. To Mark. He wrote on hotel stationery, airline napkins, even the margins of programs. The letters ranged from furious, "How dare you steal my trust? How dare you poison the only thing I love without question?" to tender. "Remember when we stayed up all night arguing about Chopin versus Liszt? Remember when you cried into my good towel?" He never mailed them. He folded them into tight squares and tucked them into his piano bench. When he traveled, he carried them like ballast. One day, a package arrived backstage in Chicago. It was from Mrs. Levin, his old piano teacher. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a clipping. On the front, local pianist wins world tour. His own smiling face at 21, clutching a trophy. On the back, man found sleeping in transit station, unidentified. The grainy photo needed no caption. Mark, beard overgrown, coat too thin. The article described him as uncooperative with services. Eli's throat burned. He folded the clipping and slid it under the lining of his instrument case. He could not throw it away. He could not frame it. It lived with him like a second shadow. The knock came in January, late and desperate. Snow lashed against the windows of his townhouse. His Steinway gleamed in the warm light of the living room. Eli opened the door and froze. Mark. Older now, thinner, but still him. His eyes had the hollow glaze of someone who had lived too long outdoors. "Please," Mark whispered. His voice cracked like old wood. "I saw the posters. I just wanted to see you. To remember I once mattered." Eli should have slammed the door. Instead, he stepped aside. Old habits are hard to kill. He made soup, laid a blanket across Mark's shoulders, and sat across from him in silence. "I've hated myself every day since," Mark said at last, staring at the spoon in his bowl. "I thought sabotaging you would make me feel less small, but it just made me nothing. I'm sorry. I don't deserve." "Stop," Eli said. His voice was low even. "You're not here to be forgiven. You're here because you're cold." Mark's tears spilled anyway. They sat in silence, broken only by the tick of Eli's old metronome, still keeping time on the shelf. The next morning, Eli did something reckless. He opened the piano lid, pulled the bench out, and nodded at Mark. "Play," he said. Mark's hands trembled as he pressed a few tentative notes. They were clumsy, halting, but honest. Eli joined in, layering a melody over the broken chords. For 3 minutes, they weren't enemies. They were boys again in a drafty room with big dreams. When the final chord faded, Eli lowered the lid. That was goodbye. Mark begged to stay, just a week, until I find somewhere. Eli looked at him, remembering the glue, the betrayal, the hollow ache of years. Part of him wanted to say yes. The other part remembered the dissonance louder than any chord. You can stay tonight, Eli said. But tomorrow you go. Mark's eyes filled again, but he nodded. He left the next morning with a blanket across his shoulders, disappearing into snow. Eli stood at the window long after, knowing some doors must close twice before they stay shut. Rumors spread. A journalist digging through old competition archives hinted at sabotage in Eli's early career. Headlines began to swirl. Prodigy overcame early scandal. Eli's agent begged him to issue a denial. Instead, Eli issued a statement. Once, someone I trusted damaged my instrument before a competition. I lost that day, but I learned that music, unlike people, can always be repaired. I carry that lesson with me in every performance. He never named Mark. He didn't need to. The silence was sharper than accusation. As his fame grew, Eli became fascinated with silence. He held rests longer than written. He let single notes ring until audiences leaned forward in their seats, aching for the next sound. In interviews, he explained, silence is part of music. Betrayal taught me that. The absence of sound can be as powerful as its presence. Privately, he admitted to himself, the silence was Mark. Years later, Eli began teaching. Students crowded into his studio, eager to learn from the household name. But instead of scales, he taught resilience. When you play, he told them, you're not just proving skill, you're proving loyalty to the instrument, to yourself. Don't let envy make you small. Don't let betrayal end your song. Some of the students nodded, not yet understanding. But a few, the ones who had already been broken by life, understood deeply. Those were the ones Eli invested in most. At his final concert, gray at the temples, Eli walked onto the stage of Carnegie Hall. He sat at the Steinway, breathed once, and began. The piece was familiar, but when he reached the final note, he held it. Longer than written, longer than anyone expected. The note grew fragile, then fierce, then vanished into silence. Eli bowed his head. In the silence that followed, he felt the ghost of Mark sitting in the front row. Not forgiven, not forgotten, but finally laid to rest. The applause rose like thunder, but Eli heard only the silence, and within it peace,